Next to Model Ts, dendrology and botany once drove. Motown, renowned for its elm-helmed roads. Even now beneath ground, we walk and drive. Galaxies abound, sprawling, alive. Terrestrial roots boost upward pronouncements, reach deeply downward and vastly outward. With knowledge and nutrients, community building. Feeding seedlings as we imbue children. Bearing, caring, sharing information, life's very gestation rests in their patience. Mother Nature's arteries, from tender stems and slender saplings to Claude Monet autumn leaves, calmly falling, so awesomely splendid, time unfolds, softly, suspended. Young and old, behold, this bitter pandemic exposed every soul as interdependent. To endure this force, one may forge alone, or score harmony in chorus and forge a home, whereby innocence thrives and diligence climbs intelligent ladders into elegant skies. From the trunks of truth, exceedingly proud, spawns the spunk of youth, achieving their crowns. Cultivating courage where allies gather. Cultures may flourish and Black lives matter. Holistic education, no split or separation, only equal positions in this ecosystem as we emulate the magistrates of photosynthesis and elevate the graduates of this noble genesis. Yeah, we gonna be all right. Onward and upward toward the light.
Hi, everybody. My name is Angelique Power. I am the president and CEO of the Skillman Foundation. We're located here in Detroit, and we fund primarily organizations that focus on the genius of Detroit's children and youth. I started at the foundation exactly 1 year ago, and I walked in to find this newly created President's Youth Council that was just waiting for me. And actually, the very first meeting I did right before I started was with the Youth Council. And when I met them, I realized pretty quickly that they were emblematic of Gen Z, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what that means. But that while we had gathered them together to offer advice, and they were good at giving counsel, really what they wanted to do was roll up their sleeves and to get really involved in the foundation itself, in our strategy, in our work, and more importantly, that we needed them to help us get to a different place. So our youth council consists of 13 young people, aged 12 to 22. They discuss issues that are important to them, significant. They bring other young people together to talk about things that matter, and they influence our strategies and grant making. They have their own pot where they make their own grants. To date, they've made over $300,000 in grants to the city of Detroit. We also support them as leaders outside of the foundation, offering opportunities like this, where they will join me shortly on the stage. They also meet with other leaders and they engage in media. In fact, this year, we actually traveled to the Mackinac Policy Conference together, and they were the youngest presenters in the history of the Mackinac Policy Conference, which was pretty cool. And more importantly, they blew the doors off of the place with their insights and their vision and their real talk. So people were following them around the rest of the conference saying like, you're amazing, can you come talk to us? Can you come talk to us? And so we have launched a project where we are connecting young Gen Z strategists with organizations like Huntington Bank and the Pistons and Chambers of Commerce so that they can help lead strategy for organizations around the city. And in fact, we even spent a week this summer in Wyoming, You see a picture of that on the screen. We did an idea exchange with local indigenous youth, and this is a night at the rodeo. While our council is extremely cool, and I could talk about it for the next 20 minutes, it's actually Michigan that is blessed to have so many youth councils in place. This happened with intentionality. In the 90s, the Kellogg Foundation made an investment where they provided matching funds to every community foundation across the state to create youth endowed funds, which we affectionately call YACs. And so now, more than 30 years later, there are all of these YACs across the city making grants. Last year, 86 youth advisory councils granted a total of $1.5 million in the state of Michigan. So that's actually just the community foundation YACs. Nonprofits have their own youth councils, Congress of Communities, Brightmoor Alliance. These are organizations that are really leaning into how youth should be leading into the future, in addition to Generator Z, which is with the Ralph C. Wilson Foundation, as well as the Jewish Fund has a teen board that's been doing a lot of fantastic grant making. So you're going to have a chance to hear from two of the youth from Skillman's Youth Council, and also to meet someone from the Community Foundation of Southeast Michigan's YAC. And their YAC was one of those that was established 30 years ago. It was a $1 million challenge grant from Kellogg that created this fund, and since then, around 600 young people have gone through their Youth Advisory Council, making a total of $1.6 million in grants. Young people that are serving on these youth councils, I always say, and this, I was saying this in Mackinac when people were following us around and saying, they're exceptional, they're exceptional. And I always say, they are exceptional. They are not the exception. Across Detroit, there are brilliant young people waiting to actually help lead us into a different place. So I'm going to run through a few slides. I don't have a clicker. There's a brilliant control room back there, so I'm talking to them to help me advance the slides. The first is who's Gen Z? So they're aged 10 to 25 years old. How many of you know Gen Zers or have Gen Zers in your life? Okay. And how many of you are Gen Z? Okay, so find the folks who raise their hands throughout the day and have conversations with them. This is the largest generation in the world, if you want to advance the slide. They are a third of the world population, a fourth of the US population. The next slide talks about how they are the most diverse generation. And so we've talked about the emerging majority coming in 2040. It's here with Gen Z. 48% are folks of color. 1 in 5 Gen Z adults identify as LGBTQIA+. 1 in 3 know someone who's gender non-binary. Next slide talks about how they are poised to be the most economically powerful generation. By 2030, 8 years away, they are predicted to have wealth that rises to $33 trillion. Next slide. They've been shaped by their experiences, shaped by the pandemic, shaped by rising gun violence in and out of schools, racial and political strife. And it is not in spite of these experiences that they are good strategists. It is because of these experiences. In our research, we found them to be extremely hopeful. They feel powerful and lots of agency. Next slide. In the racial justice summer of 2020, these uprisings were led by Gen Z, by Black and brown Gen Zers who were leading multiracial, multi-generational coalitions demanding wholesale systems change, tying climate change to police reform, to educational reform. The intersectional identities that they hold show up in how they see systems changing. So for us, the final thoughts on Gen Z is that they're changing the way that life is lived, they're changing the way business is done, and they're changing the way the world is run. They are generation integrity, they are authentic, and they easily, on the next slide you'll see, are able to talk about mental health, their own mental health and wellness, which many of us can take a page from them. Really what they're emphasizing is that we all need to focus on mental health and wellness. So today we're fortunate to hear from some in Gen Z who bring their own unique voice and perspective to this work. If you want a pulse on the future of Detroit, you should stay in contact with the young people that have grown up here and who are dreaming here and are building something big. Without further ado, I want to introduce our panelists, and thank you for the slides. We're good. Preston Welborn is a junior at the University of Michigan, where he's pursuing a bachelor's degree in film, television, and media. Prior to attending U of M, he graduated cum laude from Oakland Community College with an associate degree in cinematic arts. Preston, you can come out. He's a budding entrepreneur. He's operating his own production studio called PFP Studios. It's a production house that produces, writes, consults, and he was born into a family of community leaders, has deep pride for making a difference in his community, and we're so grateful that he is a member of the Skillman Youth Council. Welcome, Preston. Another amazing member of the Skillman Youth Council is Willeen Smith. Willeen is a freshman at Eastern Michigan University. She's a graduate of Renaissance High School in Detroit, where she was a member of the Renaissance Orchestra and the Phoenix Orchestra Volunteer Club. Willeen is a creative, working in a myriad of mediums, from painting, drawing, musical composition. Willeen has a passion for policy and research with a focus on making Detroit a more equitable city. Willeen, welcome. Join us. And finally, Jackson Glover. Jackson is a high school senior at the University of Jesuit. He joined the Community Foundation's Youth Council to further his aspirations in philanthropic work. He sits on the board of an area nonprofit. He's a volunteer sign language interpreter. He's an active community advocate. He plans to study law, criminal justice, and become a prosecuting attorney. Jackson Glover, come on out. Okay, so thank you all for being here today. It's so interesting because we're talking to expats who grew up, who love Detroit, and who decided to leave and are now, after today, going to decide to come home, right? So what would you say, having grown up here, what would make you stay in Detroit? Jackson, why don't you start?
Well, one thing that would make me stay as well, first of all, I love Detroit. I love it to its core. But one thing I would love to see is building more community. I feel like during the pandemic, we were forced apart, and I would love to see in communities and neighborhoods building more of a sense of community, and that can be with rec centers, community centers, gardens. I would love to see people just be people together. That's one thing that I would love to see.
Thank you. I know we have someone here who's from the largest urban garden, right? And so we have folks who are trying to work on that. That is such a good point, Jackson. Willeen, what would you say?
First of all, I love that point because I do think an issue that we specifically struggle with in the newer generation is being socially connected. We're very online connected. We talk to millions online every day, but less people are going outside. So I think that's a really great point. I think the thing that would make me stay in Detroit, well, I mean, I have no intentions or plans on leaving as of now, but more educational and job opportunity. I know that one of the reasons that really influenced me staying here is the fact that the Detroit Promise made it so that I could go to college debt-free. And I appreciate Detroit every day for making that a reality because I don't know how that would have happened otherwise. So I would say that's one of my priorities.
Preston.
One of the things that I always think about, and I always tell other people about Detroit who may not be from here, is about the community aspect. I feel like everybody that's ever come to Detroit and had a great time has always found a group of people that they felt they could be themselves with and they could connect with. And I think that's one of the big things about Detroit. We're all about connections and history and keeping that history going. And that's one of the things I think about every day, no matter what street I'm driving down or who I'm interacting with or where I'm at. It's just about where I'm at in history and how do I continue, moving that forward. And it's no way to continue moving the city forward if you're not here. So you got to be here to put in the work.
Thank you. Thank you. Some of the conversations we've been having here and in other places is about this talent shortage. And companies are asking themselves during the Great Resignation, what do we need to do to make our companies entice employees to come work for us? And often this is about workers today, but Gen Z has a different set of priorities in their life. So how would you advise companies, like what do they need to do to attract Gen Z? Willeen, I see you smiling.
Oh. Okay. I do think this issue is very interesting because I do believe companies kind of treat it as though it's this new thing that workers have needs. Well, I mean, I'm sure that resonates with everyone in the audience. It's just that I would say a lot of the needs that Gen Z have are advancements of basic or foundational needs that have kind of been known to people the entire time, but Gen Z has been the generation to be explicit about their needs and make them known to people. I don't think they're exactly like new or revolutionary ones necessarily. Like when people are, I know the big thing right now is the quiet quitting. And when people are talking about going to work, doing what's required of you, and then spending the time that you have off work, like living your life, I would say that sounds like completely normal to me, actually. You go to work, you do your job. I'm not saying that you underperform at your job, but you do what you're paid to do, and then you come home and you reinvest in other aspects of your life to ensure you're healthier, happier, more connected with your community, and especially post-COVID where people have experienced a lot of isolation, some deterioration in their community and health. We want to focus on the aspects of life that really bring us that emotional and physical fulfillment. And sometimes that is work. It can be work if you're very passionate about what you do, but I think the reality is that a lot of people just kind of go to work because they need to, and they need to survive. So I do hope that they have outlets outside of that that can keep them grounded and keep them happy. And if companies can't recognize that there needs to be like a balance between the two, then is it fair to be mad that people are quitting?
Well, I'll tell you, you say it's not revolutionary, but I'm Gen X, and I'm like, so you leave work. Go on. Like, what is that? What happens then? Like, and then, so it does seem revolutionary to some of us.
Well, I would like to say for the record, I'm recently graduated high school, so I wouldn't say I'm on the workforce in the same way that some of our older Gen Z members are, but I would say that looks like you go to work, you perform the tasks that you have to do at work as required by your job, but you take the time that you have outside of work to reinvest in yourself in other ways, whether that can be mental health, relationships, and other things along that. And then also, you leave work when it no longer suits your needs, which is the theoretical relationship between the worker and the boss. Under capitalism, it should be that we provide the things that our employers find useful to their business, and they also serve our needs. It's kind of like a mutual relationship in that sense. But I think the expectation has been a lot of times, don't speak up, don't say anything. If something's bothering you at work, just keep your head down, do what you need to do to climb the ladder, and basically suffer until you retire. And I think that's awful. I think that's awful.
Thank you. Thank you. Preston, you also have Gen Z is very entrepreneurial. PFP Studios, if I didn't mention it in the bio, you created this production house. This is your production house. on Instagram, it's PFP Studios, is that right?
Correct. Yes.
And so how do you view like creating a space where people want to work? What is that work ethos?
I think it kind of goes to Willeen's point of, having that emotional and physical kind of safety net. I think that's really one of the things that I guess I would say I think Gen Z values a lot. And it gets to the point where, like Willeen said, we look at it and assess our values, and I feel like we kind of separate work from the other side of life a lot of times. And there are points in life where work and personal coincide, and I think it's about finding that balance to where everything you do outside of work is not all you are, but everything you do at work is not all that you are either. And I think that's a balance that Gen Z is looking to, kind of add a change to, because I don't think we really view the way things are now as the way we want things to be for our lives and our children's lives. So we're just trying to do whatever we can to speak up and make a difference. And it takes one person just to start it and get everybody going.
Thank you. Some of our research looked at how Gen Zers spend money, and they will purposefully not shop in places where they feel they aren't actually living their values. If there are places that just do like a Pride logo during Pride Month, and then it goes away and they never actually stick to it. If they've made racial equity statements after Racial Justice Summer, but then nothing happened after, Gen Z is paying attention, and they move their money with their values in really interesting ways. Jackson, how do you feel about what employers need to do to attract Gen Z?
Well, I think one thing to keep in mind when you think of Gen Z is we're a generation that cares. We're a generation that wants to see change. And as you can see here by this panel, we all have ideas of what we want our future to look like. So I think the more we start to incorporate Gen Z into the big room, the big room where ideas are made, is when we can actually start to see and kind of pass that torch on to the next generation and kind of let things to progress swiftly.
So you all serve on youth councils, and a lot of what we talked about is that beyond the grant making, it really is an attempt to move Gen Z and youth voice out into Detroit more intentionally. What do you all think would help lift youth leadership and youth voice in Detroit?
Anyone?
One thing I think that would help lift the voice of Gen Z in Detroit is really starting to have a system of communication that we use, on a regular basis, because everybody uses social media. Everybody hangs out in different social circles, but people still connect at the end of the day. And we need to, or we should move forward to creating a standard of, when we do an event, things are at these specific locations. Normally, we put things out on these social channels and invite people to come through so we can continue to connect. I think in Detroit, there's a lot of people that try to start a lot of things on their own, but there are a lot of people that work together, and it's about really putting those two groups together, because there are a lot of people that are really strong-willed, have a lot of great ideas, but don't necessarily have the power or the team behind them to make those things come to fruition. And there are people that are putting in work and making a lot of things happen, but when there's so many people and so many different focuses, sometimes things can get a little blurry over time. So continuing to bridge those two groups, I think will create a standard in Detroit moving forward, so when the next generation comes to start organizing, they'll say, oh, this is the standard they set, this is how they did their thing, this was the outcome. So now we can start to set our standard and look at what we want our outcomes to be, so we can move forward from there.
It's interesting. I had a conversation at breakfast with someone who said that sometimes it might be easier to learn all the incredible things happening in Detroit at an event like Homecoming, because that connective tissue that you're talking about, there's so many entrepreneurs here, there's so many creatives that are doing their thing and making it happen, but that connective tissue and communication between folks is something that could happen better. Willeen, you were nodding.
I think Preston brought up a great point about bridging the gap, kind of meeting in the middle. I personally want my Gen Z peers to pledge to be part of processes. You know, a lot of people focus, like if you talk about voting, a lot of people focus on the big national election, but there are local elections or even city council meetings that I would say greater affect your everyday life and how you navigate the city, the things that, the houses that are built, the resources that are made available. I want them to make more of an effort to be included in some of the more less commercialized aspects of that process, but also I think our, I don't want to say elders, should make those should make those resources available to us to, I mean, just a space like homecoming, even the ability for me to be on stage means that someone has made an opportunity for a youth's voice to be heard. So we want to bring our talents, we want to bring our efforts, our motivation, and then we want to be met with the space to share that.
Jackson.
So I think you both said bridging the gap. That is so important, and making sure that we can create these spaces, because we do have this opportunity as grant makers to make this bigger change than dream possible. And I think one thing I keep intentional when I'm doing my grant making and reviewing grants is, where's the youth in this aspect of whatever organization it is? Making sure there is some input from someone from the younger generation, because I know that I have big dreams. I know that there are tons and tons of youth out there that have dreams bigger than I, so I'd like to keep that intentional, because there are so many young people out there who feel like their voice isn't being heard, so make sure that they have that space where they can feel appreciated and like their voice is being heard. So that's one thing I keep intentional.
And at Skillman, we always say, like, if anyone is interested in connecting to Gen Z, we are lucky enough to invest about $20 million a year in these organizations that work with brilliant Detroit youth. The Community Foundation is similar. There are so many foundations that are around town that can help connect you after this panel. I want to wrap us up with just going down the line and have you say to future investors, expats who love this, they have also not lived and grown up in the city in the last 19, 20 years. So what is the one word or phrase you would use to describe the Detroit of today and the Detroit of your dreams? Jackson.
One word I would use to describe Detroit is bold. We are a city that is vibrant, that is lively, and we want to keep that continuing throughout, the future. So I would say bold.
I would say Detroit is warm. There are a lot of people who come together in community in a way that I have not seen prioritized in other places I've been. And I do value that. And I hope in the future we can also continue to prioritize that.
I think the phrase that kind of comes to mind for me now also bridges into the future, and it's kind of some of the concepts we spoke about in Wyoming and the conversations we had coming back from that trip as well, about, Detroit is a really youth focused and youth led place. And that's something, it's a lot of youth focus, and in the future we need to focus more on youth leadership, because we are the generation that's going to continue moving things forward. So if we don't have people in positions of leadership, who's to say where we're going to go? So,
thank you all. The median age in Detroit is 34. This is a very young city. It's part of our asset, our biggest asset. And so I think you can see today, as I said before, this is just a small sampling of exceptional Detroiters, but they are not the exception. All young Detroiters are exceptional. So thank you.